Welcome to my class. This is going to be part of a series that I'm doing on basic music theory, and for this class we're going to be focusing on scales and keys. Here's what I mean by that. Every song and every piece of music you've ever heard in the Western world contains only 12 notes at most. Those 12 notes do repeat again at higher and lower pitches like this. So that's why it seems like there's a lot more. A full-length piano has 88 physical keys on it, but it's just the same 12 notes over and over. And if you're thinking that 12 notes doesn't seem like enough to make a piece of music with, here's where it gets even more limited. Most pieces of music actually only use 7 notes. That's because there are certain groupings of notes that sound good together. And if we're playing those groupings of notes up and down as a technical exercise, we call them scales. But if we're using them to make a piece of music, we call them keys. So scales and keys are the same groupings of notes as each other, but they're just used in different ways. So you will hear me using the terms scales and keys quite interchangeably. In this class, we're going to cover the most basic scales and keys that are used in Western music. That is the major scale and the various different types of minor scale. Let's start by looking at the names of the notes on a piano. You can find this diagram in the PDF booklet that comes with the course. If you don't know the names of the notes yet, some people find it helpful to write the notes onto your keyboard using a whiteboard marker. The easiest scale to learn is C major because it's just the white notes on a piano. If we're playing the C major scale, we start with C, play all the white notes up to the next C, and then come back down again. If we're playing a song in the key of C major, we can of course use those notes in any order we like. But we will find ourselves naturally gravitating to the note of C over and over. This is because that's the note that the whole scale or key is based on. And you'll sometimes hear this referred to as the root note. If you find yourself playing a song with these same white notes, but instead of gravitating to C, you're actually gravitating to A, that means you're playing in the key of A minor instead of C major. C major and A minor are closely related. They're known as the relative major and the relative minor, and every major key has its own relative minor key to go with it. So A minor has all the same notes as C major, but you gravitate to A instead, and that's because A is the root note of the key. We can kind of tell major and minor keys apart when we're listening because songs in a major key tend to sound happier, whereas songs in a minor key tend to sound sadder. We do also have some extra options when it comes to playing in a minor key, specifically when it comes to the 6th and the 7th notes of the scale. We can stick to the white notes in A minor if we want, and that's called the natural minor scale. Or we can raise those 6th and 7th notes to the black notes above. This makes it either the harmonic or the melodic minor scale, depending on which notes we raise. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. You don't need to commit every note of every scale to memory as we go along. It's enough just to get a basic understanding of how the scales are constructed. We'll talk a little bit more about that next. Tones and semitones are measures of distance between one note and another note. The smallest distance we can possibly have in Western music is the semitone. To play 2 notes a semitone apart on the piano, we'd play one note and then another one directly next to it, either above or below. And that would be directly next to it, including both white and black notes. If you're playing a semitone on a guitar, then you put your finger on a fret and then the next fret along, either way. If you play both of these notes of the semitone together at the same time, it will sound awful. It clashes and it makes you think of horror films like Jaws. But if we go up or down just one more black or white note, it doesn't sound so bad. That distance is called a tone, and it's made up of 2 semitones or halftones. Depending on where you are in the world, you'll sometimes also hear tones and semitones called steps and half steps. So now that we know what tones and semitones are, we can describe any scale we like by using tones and semitones to measure the distance between the notes. Here's the C major scale. In the right-hand column there, you can see all of the distances between one note and the next. So for instance, if you look at the right-hand side next to D, it tells you to go up a tone, and that takes you up to E. So with this right-hand side of the table, we have a formula that we can use to build any major scale, no matter what note it starts on. For example, here's the E major scale. Even though it starts on a different note, it still has exactly the same distances between each note. So you'll notice that the right-hand column on this table is exactly the same as it was in the last one. And that'll also be the same for every major scale. The column on the right is only going to change if we change the type of scale. For example, if we change it to a minor scale. Here's an example of a minor scale so you can see. So this is the A natural minor scale. And as you can see, it's the notes of A up to the next A. Again, you could use this formula to work out every natural minor scale there is. But you don't need to actually go through this painstaking process of counting tones and semitones every time you want to play a scale or compose in a particular key. Eventually you will commit the notes of each scale to memory, and until then you can always refer to the PDF booklet provided in the course, or you can just Google the scales. It's enough for now just to understand that this relationship exists between the different scales. Every time you play a major scale, for instance, you're playing the exact same thing as every other major scale, just starting on a different note. Tones and semitones are especially useful for singers to know about. If you're a singer like me, you'll know that we all have a particular range of notes that we sound our best in and that we feel are most comfortable singing in. So if you know what tones and semitones are, you can tell your accompanist, I want this song, but I want it a tone lower, for example. And that'll give them the info that they need to transpose it into a different key for you. Just don't ask them to do it at the last minute, because that'll give them a heart attack. The black notes on a piano are referred to as either sharps or flats, depending on which scale we're using. Each note can potentially be given two different names. So for example, the note between C and D can be called either C sharp or D flat. It can be confusing at first to get used to the two different names for each black key and how to know which one to call it. I remember being really confused about this when I first started learning music theory. The short answer is learn the scales and you'll kind of come to understand that over time. But that's not a very satisfying answer, so here's the long version, buckle up. There are a few rules when it comes to major and minor scales. Number one, they always have 7 notes, plus the root note again at the top. Number 2, we don't mix sharps and flats, it's one or the other. And 3, there must be one and only one of each type of note. And when I say type, I mean like we can't have an A and an A flat, or we can't have an A and an A sharp. We can only have one type of A. The same goes for all the other notes. We can only have one type of B, one type of C. So here's an example of those rules in action. This is a nice easy scale, D major, and it has just 2 sharps in it. You can see that it starts on a D, and then next we've got an E. And now look at the third note. There has to be some kind of F next. We're not allowed to just skip a note. And we also can't have 2 different kinds of G. So we know in this context, we're looking at an F sharp, not a G flat. It's the same once we get up to the 7th note of the scale. The 6th note is a B, so next there has to be some kind of C. So that's how we know it's a C sharp and not a D flat. These rules are really easy to stick to if we're using a scale that doesn't have many sharps or flats. But once we get up to 5 sharps or flats, it starts getting a bit weird. Here's an example. So this is F sharp major. It has 6 sharps, making it one of the hardest major scales there is. The first note is an F sharp. We already know that because the whole scale is called F sharp major. Rule number 2 says we don't mix sharps and flats, so if there's an F sharp in it, we know we can't call any of the other notes a flat. So let's go through the notes one by one. F sharp to start with. Then we've got a G sharp, followed by an A sharp. The next note is a B, followed by a C sharp, and then a D sharp. This is the weird bit. Okay, so the next note has to be some kind of E. We're not allowed to just skip the E. But we can't call this note E flat because that would be mixing sharps and flats. Besides, we already know that it's a D sharp below it because there has to be some kind of D, right? If we skip past the 7th note and look at the top one, which is just the first note repeated, we know that's an F sharp. Can't be anything else. The whole scale is named after that note. But we also can't have an F and an F sharp at the same time. So this is where the rules start to contradict each other, right? Because we know there has to be an E, but it's not an E flat. We know we can't have an F and an F sharp, but that's what it looks like, right? So the only thing we can do is call that 7th note an E sharp, even though it looks like an F. In case you were wondering, there's also such a thing as an F flat, a B sharp, and a C flat. Here's another example of that similar weirdness at work. This is G sharp natural minor. So it has 5 sharps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's just the first note again, so it doesn't count. Now let's say we want to make this into a harmonic minor scale, which means we have to raise the 7th. The 7th note of this scale is there, it's the F sharp. That's already sharpened, right? It's already got a sharp on it. So how do we sharpen a sharp note? Well, we give it a double sharp. Only thing we can do, right? Double sharp, it's a thing. All of this is in service of sticking to those rules that we talked about. And the rules do ultimately make sense, it just takes a little while to get your head around them. If all of that has made your head spin, you're not alone. It makes everyone's head spin, it's a tough concept. And that's why most music teachers will respond to the question of, is it a C sharp, is it a D flat, how do you know? By just saying, learn your scales, and you'll come to understand it in time. Next, you'll be glad to know we are dialing it back a bit. We're going to be talking about major scales. Here's a list of all the major scales that have sharps in them. Now you might be wondering why I haven't put this table in alphabetical order. That would make sense, right? It'd be easier to find the one that you're looking for. It would be easier, but this order will help you to understand the theory behind scales. What we've done here is put them in the order of how many sharps each scale has. When we do put them in this order, it's easy to see that if you look at that right-hand column, we're using the same sharp notes every time. We're just adding one more, one more, one more. And there is an age-old way to remember these sharps. And it goes like this. Father Charles goes down and ends battle. Now there are 7 sharp keys as shown, but in practice nobody ever uses C sharp major because it's easier to call it D flat major, which has 5 flats instead of 7 sharps. F sharp major also isn't a popular key, having 6 sharps, because once you have to start saying E sharp instead of F or B sharp instead of C, it starts to get a bit too complex for most people. So we mostly stick to the first 5. Now let's look at the same table but for the flat scales. Again, it's laid out in the order of how many flats there are in each scale. We have another mnemonic to help remember the order of flats, and helpfully it's the same one as last time but just backwards. So it's battle ends and down goes Charles's father. Similar guidelines apply. Nobody ever uses C flat major because it's easier to call it B major, which is 5 sharps instead of 7 flats. And then people tend to just avoid G flat major if they can, unless they enjoy pain. To help us remember what order these sharp and flat keys go in, there's a really handy diagram called the circle of fifths, which we're going to talk about in the next video.